I'm Richard Templar, Chief Executive of the Manawatu District Council.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Ford. I'm the Deputy Mayor at Manawatu District Council, and a very big welcome. A welcome to the first of 5 discussions on some of the really big issues that are facing our district over the next few years. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be hosting a series of sessions on 5 topics. We'll discuss the challenges each topic presents and how each one relates to Council's long-term planning process. Tonight, we'll be discussing earthquake-prone buildings in the Feilding CBD. Let us know where you are listening in from by typing in the comment box below. The next few Monday nights, we'll also be covering housing availability in the Manawatu, planning for the impact of climate change on our district, sealing our gravel roads, and the future of our community facilities. We are hoping to encourage conversation about each of these topics to help us at Council understand how our communities feel about them and how you think Council should address the challenges that each one brings. It's great to see some people joining us from around the district. Welcome to you all. Just click the like button if you can hear us loud and clear. Also, it would be good if you could tag someone who should be joining in here or share the session now on your own Facebook page. That will increase our coverage and the number of people who might join the conversation. In this evening's session, we're going to give a brief presentation on today's topic, earthquake-prone buildings, then open the floor for questions. Type your question in the feed below and we'll do our best to answer them by the end of this session. But if there is a question we can't answer, we'll find the answer and post it in the comments in the next couple of days. We expect this Facebook Live session to last for about half an hour at the maximum.
Council is beginning to work through its 10-year plan process for the 10-year plan beginning 2021 to 2031. A 10-year plan sets out what the Council plans to do and the projects it plans to undertake over the next 10 years and the budget to get those things done. A 10-year plan is a legal requirement for all councils in New Zealand, and the plan needs to be adopted by the Council in just over a year's time, by June 2021. Part of the decision-making process for the 10-year plan is setting the budget. Council needs to understand what is required in terms of investment in infrastructure and balancing this with the needs and the wants of the community. When considering the budget, we need to make sure we've covered all the necessities before we can consider the nice-to-haves. There are some infrastructure and services that are required by law, such as local roads, wastewater treatment, provision of fresh water, building regulations and animal control. There are other activities that are not legally required, but still a priority for Council, like funding for community development, economic development, maintaining our parks and reserves and our community facilities. Council needs to consider and prioritise all these services and activities when putting together its 10-year plan budget. The topics we will cover in these 5 Facebook Live sessions are earthquake-prone buildings tonight, housing availability in Manawatu, climate change, sealing our gravel roads, and the future of community facilities. These are 5 of the big issues facing the district in the near to medium future that Council and the community need to make some key decisions on. These decisions will have budget implications, and budget implications have rates implications. We need to get our heads around the problem now so that we can plan for a way to address them in the future. That's why it's important for Council to understand community opinion about these issues as soon as possible. We're hoping that these 5 conversations will help you understand where Council is coming from and help Council understand what you think about these challenges.
Thank you. Carry on, Richard. Next one.
So, New Zealand is an earthquake quake-prone country. And the Manawatu district is a high seismic risk area. We need to prepare ourselves for future earthquakes. Part of this is identifying and dealing with earthquake-prone buildings. Buildings or parts of buildings that are less than 34% of the standard for new buildings are considered earthquake-prone. There are roughly 100 potentially earthquake-prone buildings that Council has identified in the Manawatu district. Recent changes to the law means that the clock is ticking for the owner of many of these earthquake-prone buildings. Building owners have 15 years to strengthen or demolish their buildings, but for those deemed priority buildings, the owners have just 7.5 years to strengthen or demolish.
So there are lots of challenges to the district and to council. Back in late 2018, when we talked to the community about the future of the town centre, you told us that you value our Edwardian buildings. In particular, the facades on the first floor of these buildings contribute to the look of Feilding. These facades are often unreinforced masonry that is likely to be classified as earthquake prone. Building owners may decide that it is more financially viable to demolish their building or the facade than repair it, losing some of the character of the town. There are other impacts on our town centre if buildings are demolished. New buildings that contribute to the character of the town will only be built if there are tenants willing to pay the higher rent that justifies construction. We're yet to see how traditional brick and mortar retail trading is affected in the wake of COVID-19. We're also looking at our town centre refresh based on community feedback in 2018 and 19. As we look to the future of our Feilding town centre, we can consider and seek to address these concerns.
So what are council's legal obligations and what are the constraints on councils? Well, the Building Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Act of 2016 came into force on the 1st of July 2017. This lays out the system for managing buildings for future earthquakes. New Zealand has been divided into low, medium and high risk areas for earthquakes. And the Manawatu district, together with Wellington and areas north from there, is considered high risk. This means council has had to identify priority buildings. These are hospitals, emergency services buildings and schools, as well as any parts of unreinforced masonry buildings that could fall during an earthquake onto a road, footpath, or other priority thoroughfare. Council consulted with the community to identify these priority thoroughfares in 2019. Having identified the priority thoroughfares, Council then needed to identify potentially earthquake-prone buildings on those thoroughfares, and we then informed the owners of all those buildings that they are potentially earthquake-prone. And that has been done. We were required to do it in 2.5 years, and we have an additional 2.5 years to inform the owners of earthquake-prone buildings which are not in priority areas. Once a building has been identified as earthquake-prone, building owners have a year to accept Council's view that the building is earthquake-prone, or get an engineer's report to determine whether or not it is earthquake-prone. That is 34% or less of new build standard. Once an earthquake-prone building has been identified, priority buildings must be strengthened or demolished within 7.5 years, and non-priority buildings within 15. It's important to note that this is not a discretionary activity for council. We are required by law to do this, and enforce this?
So what is Council doing already? As Richard has said, we've already identified potentially earthquake-prone priority buildings and notified the owners. Council will begin the process of notifying non-priority earthquake-prone building owners in July 2020. The Council is working with some affected heritage building owners to help them collectively apply for support from the government's Heritage Equip Fund. This funding helps owners pay for the engineering and costing advice needed to decide whether to demolish or strengthen their buildings. Those that choose to strengthen their buildings can then apply for further funding from another Heritage Equip fund. Council continues to work with building owners to receive funding, and to date, 4 building owners have received funding for 6 buildings. The funding is equal to 67% of the cost of the engineering advice. Now that's central government money, not ratepayer money. Now these particular buildings were identified by the community as Feilding's most loved heritage buildings. That came from the town centre vision exercise that we've talked about. Council is also working on a pilot program with Engineering New Zealand, which, if approved by MB, that's the Ministry of Business,
Innovation and
Employment, will lower the cost for strengthening more simple heritage buildings. Council also advocates to central government to make earthquake strengthening more affordable and tax deductible. Council has an earthquake-prone building working party, including councillors and staff, building owners and interested parties. The working party's function is to research and provide information and options to help building owners and businesses work through the challenges associated with earthquake-prone buildings.
So we've now seen on earthquake-prone buildings. So there's now the opportunity for you to ask any questions you have, and Michael and I will do our best to answer them. So one question that has come through, and I'll put this one to Michael, is why is this an issue that Council concerns itself with? Isn't this a problem for the private building owners to deal with?
Thanks, Richard. Well, Council certainly has 2 roles. It has a regulatory role that Richard has described, but this Council has taken the view that we want to help the community through this issue. It is a challenge. The town centre is a very special town centre within New Zealand, in fact within this planet. And we're judged by our town centres. Go to any town or city around the world, we always look at the town centre, and Feilding is no exception. Our town centre has a certain charm and a character because of our Edwardian heritage buildings. So we have a vested interest in maintaining and enhancing a vibrant town centre. We want the business community to be successful, to be vibrant, and of course we've got the new challenge with COVID-19 that we want to help businesses through with that as well. So if we lose our best buildings, our heritage buildings, they're gone forever. We only have one opportunity to make a decision. Yes, we keep it. No, we demolish. So much of the benefit, however, is to the community more so than perhaps the building owner. And we talked before about a lot of the value of these buildings from a heritage and aesthetic point of view is above the level of the veranda. It's generally the first floor facade. And in many of these buildings, there's no rent coming from the first floors of these buildings. So there's very little benefit to the building owner, but there is benefit to the community. So we're keen to, I guess, ask our community, to talk to the community to see whether there's an appetite for Council to be able to assist building owners who are interested in preserving our heritage. And we talk about some of the questions that we're wanting feedback on. You'll find on the web, on our Council website under the 10-year plan section, and you go to the earthquake prone building section, and there's some questions there. Do you think we should assist at all? And then if so, how could we do that? And some of the options would be We could perhaps waive some building consent fees, resource consent fees. Maybe we could look at remission of rates while the building is being worked on. We look around the country and we see that some councils have a heritage facade grant fund. Wanganui is a city close by who has a heritage facade grant fund that building owners can apply to for financial assistance if they're upgrading and retaining their facade. Another possible option might be a loan for building owners that would otherwise have no access to borrowing money, and this could be done perhaps at no cost to the ratepayers. Those are just a couple of suggestions. You might well have your own thoughts on what council could consider. But the first question is, should we be assisting at all? And I see there's another question just come in, Richard, which I'll fire back to you. Does council own any earthquake-prone buildings? And yeah, we'll start with that one.
So the answer to that is yes. In the previous 10-year plan, council identified that it would need to earthquake strengthen both the current council building, the building we're in now, and also our library. While they are above 34% in the case of the council building and around 34% in the case of the library, because they're community gathering places in the case of the library, and because this is a key building in a civil defence response, we need to strengthen them. So these are projects the council is currently working on, developing the designs and what will need to be done in the case of earthquake strengthening. For the council building here, it's quite a major process because we want to make the building very strong. So in the event of an earthquake, the building is able to be used as a civil defence hub. And in the case of the library, it's about strengthening and improving the library so it can serve the community for the next 20 or 30 years.
Very good. I see there's one coming here. What is the town centre refresh and town centre vision? Maybe I'll have a crack at that one.
Thank you.
The town centre vision was an exercise that we went through late 2018, where we asked the community, what do you like about our town centre? What would you like, what don't you like about our town centre? What would you like changed? And looking to the future, what would you like our town centre to be known for into the future? So we're looking out 20 or so years, 2040, and we got some excellent feedback. We had, and we prepared this, don't know if you can see it, this town centre vision publication, and it's worth just, we had over 300 Facebook comments, over 3,000 post-it notes from community meetings, 9 online submissions, and about 900 workshop feedback points. So we've got great feedback from our community. Now we're following that up. So we now know basically what the community likes, and we know that they like our heritage buildings. There was a fairly realistic and practical view that came through loud and clear that we're wanting our best heritage buildings kept, and maybe as many others as possible, but maybe we need to just let the market decide with some of those. Now, the town centre vision is taking it to the next step. We're recognising that our town centre will be different for a number of reasons. One of those is that some of our earthquake-prone buildings will be strengthened and restored, hopefully. Some will probably be demolished. Hopefully they'll be redeveloped with new buildings. What we don't want, of course, is a lot of abandoned buildings or vacant sites. So, but we're also looking at other uses in the town centre. Should we have residential apartments and townhouses in the town centre? And there was a fairly big appetite with people saying, yes, that would enhance our town centre for many reasons, including the security reason. So the town centre vision is actually looking ahead to actually plan what our town centre will look like, give us a template, how will people get around, everything from traffic, the look and feel, what happens there, what uses, and that will hopefully set us up for the next 20 to 50 years. The town centre will be different, but all going well, it'll be better. It'll complement all the good features of the town centre at the moment, and add some to that.
Thank you, Michael.
Richard, how will a member of the public know whether there's an earthquake, whether they're about to enter an earthquake-prone building as we go through this process?
So the council has sent notices to the owners of priority buildings which are earthquake-prone. The owners have then up to a year to decide whether they're going to contest that notice by getting essentially a second opinion and a qualified engineer's opinion, or they're going to accept it. Once they have either accepted or it's been reviewed by an engineer and determined that it is earthquake prone, a notice will then be affixed to the building. So that's a notice, and that's in the Act. For those of you who have visited Wellington or Christchurch, you'll have seen basically notices next to the doors on buildings that note that the building is an earthquake prone building. So that's how that will occur.
Very good. And I guess what happens if a building basically refuses to do anything about their building come 7.5 years' time, bottom line? Yeah,
I saw that question. I thought, yes, I'll answer this one. So if a building owner refuses to either strengthen or demolish their building after 7.5 years, firstly, the council will politely remind them they need to do it. Secondly, if the building owner is working on the strengthening but doesn't have it completed, then we have the option of granting them an extension, and we will obviously be reasonable about that. But if the building owner has made no effort to strengthen and no effort to demolish, then council has the option of demolishing the building and then charging that cost to the building owner. And we are required to do that under the Act. So it's a kind of a last resort. It's not something we'd want to do, but if they're not going to do anything about an earthquake-prone building, ultimately the council will step in and do that.
Right, we certainly want to avoid that at all costs, if at all possible. And I see there's a question there in terms of the numbers of earthquake-prone buildings. My understanding is we have about 100 earthquake-prone buildings in the district. Most of those are in Feilding's town centre. Most of them are older buildings, but not all of them are heritage buildings. So we talk about heritage buildings mainly being the Edwardian buildings built in the first decade of the last century. There are also some older Victorian buildings as well, but Feilding is well known for its commercial Edwardian buildings. We have a number of other buildings that are just older buildings that most of us probably wouldn't call heritage buildings, but are still earthquake prone. So there's kind of two issues. There's the heritage buildings that are earthquake prone, and then there are the non-heritage buildings that are earthquake prone. In terms of the numbers, I think there's about 40 within the priority thoroughfare. Does that sound right, Richard?
Yep.
Yeah. So big challenge for our town centre. 40 buildings have to be in our town centre, have to be addressed one way or the other, strengthened and restored, or demolished within a reasonably short time frame, 7.5 years. And council is wanting to help this community, help the building owners, help the businesses also, because there'll be disruption. They'll be moving from premise to premise with some of the businesses. We're wanting to help everybody through this issue and come out the other side more positive, more vibrant than ever before.
There's a couple of questions I'd like to tackle here. One is, how likely is it that we will have a big earthquake in the near future? And how have the Christchurch and Kaikoura earthquakes affected insurance? So to answer the first question, how likely are we to have a big earthquake? Because we've been identified as the high-risk zone, that suggests that sometime in the next 2 or 3 decades, we potentially may experience a significant earthquake. So that's magnitude probably somewhere between 5 and 7, possibly higher. The challenge with earthquakes is they're incredibly difficult to predict when they will actually occur. An analogy an earthquake scientist used is if you consider a traffic intersection and you look at all the accidents that occur over the course of the year, you can work out, on average, how likely an accident is going to occur at that intersection. But what you can't do is say on any given day whether there'll be an accident. So the modelling for our area is that it is a high seismic risk, which means we're at less than a basically 1 in 500 chance of a very significant earthquake. So that means there is a measurable risk over the next 30 to 50 years, and that risk increases the longer you extend in a time period. It would be worth noting that given the recent earthquake activity in parts of New Zealand close to here, that risk has increased. So that takes me to the Christchurch and Kaikoura. The reality is earthquake insurance has got substantially more expensive because of the huge earthquake events in Christchurch and Kaikoura. Now I say huge in this case, I'm meaning in insurance. The Christchurch earthquake had the single largest insurance payout in total of any earthquake in the world. The reason being is that New Zealand has very high levels of earthquake insurance. In other places where they get lots of earthquakes, people don't have as much insurance. So the total payout for the Christchurch earthquake has been measured in the billions of dollars. And as a result, insurance companies, being commercial entities, have significantly increased their premiums. It's been suggested by the insurance community that New Zealand, if it has another large earthquake in the near future, insurance premiums may become unaffordable for earthquake insurance in New Zealand. We're hoping that doesn't happen. Insurance premiums is actually a significant expenditure for council, and our earthquake premiums have gone up substantially.
So don't forget to have a look at our earthquake-prone building page on our council website. You'll get to it through the 10-year plan button on our council website because there's quite a bit more information there, and there's those questions that I mentioned before about do you think we should assist building owners at all? And also, if so, how should we do that? So we're really keen to get your feedback. That's the purpose of this exercise. Just looking at some new questions that have just come in.
So there's a question from Pete Galpin. What services will be reduced to fit in with the planned rates decrease due to COVID-19? We're not decreasing rates. The average rate change is 0, and we're achieving that using our emergency reserves. We're not going to reduce any services.
So someone's asking, in terms of the assistance options available to us, do all those options mean an increase in rates? Well, all the work that we've done to date, and I have to say we've been pretty successful. We've managed to get a change in the regulations and the legislation, which has been of some relatively minor assistance to building owners in our district, actually greater benefit to some of the owners in other districts. We've been pushing for tax deductibility, And we won't take full credit because it really came in as a result of COVID-19, the first business package. However, it has happened. The work we're doing with Heritage Equip, that's part of the Ministry of Culture. It's a government department. Delighted that there's close to $100,000 already come into our community to help building owners work their way through that. The work we're doing with Engineering New Zealand hasn't cost us anything. Really, the input to date has been some of our own time because we want to make this work. But some of the suggestions that we're talking about could cost extra rates in terms of perhaps the likes of the Heritage Grant. That would be putting some ratepayers' money aside that building owners can apply to. The loan scheme that I mentioned before, my thinking would be that if we did go down that track, it wouldn't cost the ratepayers anything. It would be neutral for the ratepayer. And then the other two options that we talked about, which were the waiving of the building and resource consent fees. It's not so much paying money out, it's more foregoing some money. And also the rates rebate, I guess, is rather similar for the time that the building is being worked on. It's out of action, it's not receiving any rent. We could look at foregoing the rates for that period. None of these decisions have been made, they're just suggestions, and we're interested in any suggestions that you might have. So they could affect the rates, but they needn't necessarily affect the rates.
Right, I'm just going to rapid fire through some of your questions. When do we have to notify you when we're going to demolish or strengthen? Once a building is determined as earthquake prone, if it's priority, you have 7.5 years. If it's not a priority building, you have 15 years to actually do it, but you don't need to notify us what you're going to do. You just have to do it. Does council have a list of earthquake engineers that they can recommend? Not yet. This is something we're working with Heritage Equip and MBON to see if they're willing to make available.
I would say come and talk to perhaps a councillor or two who might be able to make a few suggestions in that light. It's very difficult for council to make a recommendation as a council.
And Heritage Equip do have some advice on their website. Redevelop the first floors as apartments. That is certainly an option, and I think it makes a good idea. Can we have a 10-year rates holiday? Hello, Russell. No.
The comment there about the first floor of these buildings. So anyone that is looking to retain the building, strengthen and restore, I think that the key to it is actually going to be making use of the first floor of those buildings, and the most likely use is apartments. And that applies to both the old buildings that could get restored and also any new buildings that we're wanting. If we're going to have 2-story buildings, it is likely to be residential use on the first floor. So very good suggestion and highly likely to happen.
We've got a question from Julie White. We're the landlords of our building. As far as I know, we've only had one notice delivered to say we're below the percentage required. This notice was delivered to our tenants, relying on them passing notices. Council can only ever operate on the information it has. So if it has your tenants listed as the building owners rather than yourselves, that's the information we'd have operated on. So we're just going off the data information we have. Trevor asks, is it possible to put an external video tour? If you go on the Stuff website and search in the Manawatu section for earthquake-prone buildings, there's a very good article by Sam Kilmeister on there, which has, they used a drone, a camera drone to fly around the Feilding CBD and take pictures of some of the buildings. I'd recommend you have a look at that.
So the buildings that have had some engineers' assistance, engineering fee assistance from Heritage Equip to date are some that are probably very well known to you all. The Feilding Hotel on Manchester Square, a very prominent landmark building. The Terry Urquhart Law Office on the corner of MacArthur and Goodbehere Streets, one of the most architecturally magnificent buildings that Feilding has. and then there's the Carthew's Corner, currently Smith's Pharmacy, but also the Gifford Optometrist building and the two buildings in Manchester Street on the other side of the Smith's Pharmacy. So it's actually the grouping of buildings there that are particularly important. So those are the ones that have had assistance to date. There are another few buildings that have applications into Heritage Equip at the moment. We're waiting to hear. And if anyone else is wanting advice on how to go through that process, feel free to contact us.
So I'll answer one last question and then we'll wrap it up. Stuart asks, if we have not had a notice, does this mean the building is okay? We've only issued notices to buildings on priority thoroughfares. If you're not on a priority thoroughfare and you have an unreinforced masonry building, you'll probably receive a notice for us later on. One of the things you can do is come and talk to council about your building. We'll probably be able to give you an idea of whether it is likely to be identified as possibly earthquake prone. So thank you very much for your questions. You can find more information on tonight's topic, as well as each of our 4 topics, on the council's website. Just click on the link to the 10-year plan, and it's also the link at the top of the comments. This session has been recorded and will be loaded onto both our Facebook page and the Earthquake Prone Building web page. You can sign up there to receive any updates we post on this topic. Next Monday evening, our discussion topic is the shortage of housing in the Manawatu district and what council's role should be in addressing the problem. Join us then. Thank you very much. So it's good night from me, Richard Templar.
And it's good night from him, Michael Ford. Thanks very much. Bye.